A 63-year-old fishing captain named Walter Briggs was navigating the reef-strewn waters off the coast of Key West, Florida, when he saw something that would alter his perception of reality forever. Beneath the clear shallows, wedged in a bed of vibrant coral, shimmered what looked like a massive glass anchor, its curves smooth, impossibly translucent, and glinting with an eerie blue glow. No one could explain how it got there. But when Captain Briggs reached over and tugged it free, something happened that defied every natural law he had ever known. The ocean stilled, the air thickened. Time itself seemed to stop. When authorities arrived and reviewed his account, they struggled to comprehend what had occurred, and even now, scientists remain baffled. Would you dare to pull something like that from the deep? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you're drawn to stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe for more strange and true mysteries from the sea. Captain Walter Briggs had been sailing the waters off the Florida Keys for more than 4 decades. At 63, with sun-leathered skin, deep crow's feet from squinting at the horizon, and hands rough as rope, he had long become a fixture in the maritime community of Key West. Locals knew him simply as Cap Briggs, a man of few words but endless stories. He didn't fish for tourists or sport. He fished because the sea was in his blood. His father before him, and his grandfather before that, had cast lines into these same turquoise waters. On the morning of April 4th, the sea was calm. The horizon lay flat like polished glass. Walter was alone on his boat, the Elysian, a modest 38-foot vessel outfitted more for utility than comfort. He had set out at dawn with a plan to check his traps, laid across a patch of coral shelf he'd known since he was a boy. The spot was reliable, unbothered by charter boats or eager young divers. It was his in the quiet, unspoken way the sea allowed such things to be claimed. The sun had just climbed above the waves when Walter noticed something odd through the water's shimmering surface. It was a faint glimmer, something refracting sunlight in a way that didn't match the surrounding coral or the familiar patches of seagrass. At first he thought it was trash, maybe a piece of a shipwrecked bottle or a diver's mask lost to the current. But as he steered closer, he saw the shape more clearly. It wasn't small. It was massive, maybe 4 or 5 feet in length, smooth, curved, and oddly symmetrical. It shimmered not like metal but like ice beneath the surface. It wasn't just reflecting light. It seemed to glow faintly, pulsing almost, like it was alive. He cut the engine and let the Elysian drift closer. The object was embedded in a dense coral mound, locked in place by decades, maybe centuries of growth. He could now see that it had the unmistakable shape of an anchor, flukes, shank, and stock. But this anchor was unlike any he had ever seen. It appeared to be made entirely of glass, or something that looked like glass but didn't distort the water around it. The transparency was too perfect, too deliberate, and it wasn't weathered. It had no barnacles, no seaweed, no signs of age. It looked as though it had just been forged, or formed. He leaned over the side of the boat, peering down into the crystalline water. The morning sun filtered through the waves, illuminating the object like a spotlight from heaven. He reached for his hook pole, the same one he used to retrieve buoys or stir tangled nets, and extended it downward. The pole touched the object with a soft clink, not the hollow ring of metal on metal, but a dull chime that reverberated through the water like a tuning fork. His brow furrowed. Anchors didn't chime. Walter grunted and adjusted his grip. The hook caught one of the flukes. He pulled, expecting resistance, but the object shifted slightly, as if the coral were merely pretending to hold it in place. That's when something changed. The moment he lifted the object free from the coral bed, just an inch, everything around him slowed. He wasn't sure at first if he had blacked out, or if it was a trick of the sun, or even a dizzy spell. But as he held the anchor in the water with his pole, suspended like an artifact reclaimed from myth, the ocean stilled. The waves froze mid-lap against the hull. The seabirds circling above halted in the sky, wings mid-beat, eyes glassy and motionless. The wind that had teased his beard vanished. The rope lines on the deck, which had been swaying gently, now hung frozen in mid-air, stiff like sculpture. He blinked. His heart thudded slowly, heavily. His breath echoed in his ears, like he was trapped inside a vacuum. No sound, no movement. The only thing that seemed untouched by this sudden and absolute stillness was him and the anchor. A glowing hum began to build, not from the boat, not from the air. but from the object itself. It vibrated gently through the hook pole and up into his hands, then his bones. It was not unpleasant. It was intimate, familiar, as though he had held this before, in another life. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything snapped back. The waves resumed their rhythm. The bird shrieked and dove. The wind rushed over the deck, tugging at his cap. A can on the floor rolled across the boards with a metallic clatter, as if it had just remembered gravity. Walter gasped. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. The anchor slipped from his pole and tumbled back into the coral, fitting once again into its strange cradle like a puzzle piece. He sat down hard on the deck, staring into the water, sweat running cold down the back of his neck. What had just happened? He waited, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a sunstroke. Maybe he had imagined the pause. But the details, the stillness, that vibration, it was all too real, too specific. Walter was a man who respected the sea's mysteries, but he also believed in what he could see, touch, and understand. This defied all of that, and it unsettled him in a way he couldn't shake. He retrieved his pole, pulled in the traps, barely registering the fish flapping inside them, and set a course back to the marina. His hands trembled at the wheel. Back on shore, Walter didn't go home. Instead, he headed to the local Marine Institute, a squat concrete building nestled between souvenir shops and dive centers. The staff knew him. He wasn't the type to bring in wild stories. When he walked in, his face pale and jaw set, Marine technician Carla Jensen looked up from her desk. "Cap Briggs, you okay? I need to show someone something," he said. In the small back room, he sketched what he saw, rough outlines of the anchor, its position in the coral, the shimmer. Carla listened, eyebrows raised. "You're saying time stopped?" "No, I'm saying everything else stopped." "I didn't." She stared at him for a moment, waiting for the punchline. But Walter's eyes were clear, steady. Carla called in a marine surveyor named Dr. Ian Mallory, who had worked with the Coast Guard on underwater anomalies and sonar readings. Together, they reviewed the charts and coordinates Walter had marked. Mallory, intrigued but skeptical, agreed to come aboard the next day and dive the site. "Do you think it's an old mine or something experimental?" Carla asked as Walter stood to leave. "I don't think it's anything man's put down there," he replied. That night, Walter lay awake, hearing again the chime in his bones, feeling again the weight of the impossible, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to lift that anchor again, or if he'd dare to let someone else try. The next morning came wrapped in mist, the kind that clings to the sea and makes the world feel smaller, quieter. Captain Briggs stood by the Elysian, already prepping the lines, his movements slow and deliberate. Beside him stood Dr. Ian Mallory, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, pragmatic. He had spent years diving into shipwrecks and sonar anomalies, never expecting to hear about frozen time from a seasoned fisherman. Yet something about Walter's expression, the weight in his silence, made Ian think twice before brushing it off as exaggeration. They pushed off just before sunrise. The sea was still again, but not in the unnatural way Walter had experienced the day before. The waters parted gently as the boat moved through them, cutting a path toward the coordinates. Carla Jensen had insisted on coming along too, bringing with her a waterproof camera rig, GPS tags, and a hydrophone. She wasn't sure what they were going to find, but if there was a chance to document something truly strange, she didn't want to miss it. An hour later, the Elysian arrived at the location. Walter recognized the shape of the reef immediately. His heart began to hammer. "There," he said, pointing to a spot between two coral heads. The water was a little cloudier than yesterday, but even through the haze, the glimmer was unmistakable. The anchor was still there, untouched, unclaimed. Ian and Carla donned their gear while Walter remained topside. The divers slid into the water with a practiced grace, disappearing beneath the surface. Walter watched the water ripple, arms crossed, waiting. Below, Ian's first reaction was confusion. Through his goggles, the object didn't look like any anchor he'd ever seen. It wasn't rusted or encrusted. It was impossibly clean. As he got closer, he felt a strange vibration, not in the water, but in his chest, like a low-frequency hum that wasn't audible, but present. He hovered just above it, inspecting the glassy surface. It had no seams, no bolts, no imperfections. It was smooth and flawless. He tried to film it, but the camera's feed flickered. Static fuzzed over the image. Carla gave him a thumbs-down signal. No stable video. She moved to tag the anchor with a small GPS buoy, but the moment her hand came within inches, she pulled back, startled. Her glove had brushed the surface, and for a split second, her mind had gone blank. She rose to the surface faster than normal, breaking through the waves and pulling off her mask. Walter stepped forward. "What happened?" Carla blinked. I touched it, just for a second. It was like I wasn't there anymore, like I forgot where I was." Walter nodded, confirming her fear. "That's what it does." Ian surfaced next, more slowly, but his face was pale. "We need more than cameras," he said. "We need sensors, EM field readers. That thing's emitting something." They returned to the marina, this time in silence. No fish, no laughter, just the hum of a quiet engine and 3 minds spinning with possibilities. That evening, Carla uploaded the footage they'd managed to salvage. Most of it was unusable, glitches, static, bizarre color streaks. But there were a few frames, blurry and brief, where the object could be seen. One shot, taken from above, showed something unexpected. Faint etchings along the shank of the anchor. Not rust, not cracks. Symbols. Precise, deliberate. They resembled no known alphabet. Carla magnified the image, adjusted the filters. The lines glowed faintly, barely visible to the naked eye. Walter stared at the screen. "I didn't see those yesterday." "They weren't visible," Carla said. "Not until today." Ian leaned closer. "You said you pulled it free, right? Even a little?" Walter nodded. "Maybe that activated something. Maybe it's not just an object. Maybe it's part of a system." They sent the images to a contact at NOAA, along with coordinates and a redacted account of what had happened. The response came quickly, but cautiously. The site was placed under immediate observation, with a soft request that the team refrain from further direct contact until proper analysis could be conducted. Within 48 hours, a private vessel arrived, marked only with the insignia of a scientific exploration group based out of MIT. On board were 2 physicists, a military liaison, and a linguist. Ian and Carla weren't invited aboard, but they were asked to provide all their footage and notes. Walter refused to hand over his journal. Weeks passed, rumors spread. The divers who went down from the MIT vessel reported unexpected cognitive disturbances and abnormal EM readings. Their gear failed repeatedly. They tried to raise the anchor with a remote drone, but the signal would always cut out as soon as the claw touched it. Some divers claimed to hear things underwater. A pulse, a whisper, like voices from behind thick glass. Then, without warning, the vessel left. No explanation, no press release. They simply disappeared from the Keys. Walter returned to the site 2 weeks later. The anchor was still there, but now, anchored beside it, was a small buoy with a blinking red light. A warning. He didn't touch it again. Not because he was afraid, but because something told him not to. As if the object itself was waiting. Was it ancient? Alien? A weapon? A relic? Or something else altogether? Walter never got a clear answer. Neither did Carla or Ian. The MIT team refused further contact. NOAA stopped replying, and within months the area was restricted on all maritime charts, labeled as a protected marine research zone. Trespassers were discouraged, with heavy fines, but Walter knew. He knew what he saw, what he felt, and somewhere deep inside he feared that if anyone ever removed that anchor completely from its coral cradle, time wouldn't just pause, it might unravel. And now we ask you, what do you think that anchor really is? Could it be a piece of lost ancient technology? A remnant from a forgotten civilization? Or a visitor from another world? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit the like button if this mystery pulled you in. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life enigmas from the deep, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your theories and your hometown seas. 2 weeks after the mysterious vessel disappeared from the Keys, Captain Walter Briggs began noticing something strange in town. He wasn't alone. At first, it was small things, subtle shifts in routine, people forgetting recent conversations, clocks ticking out of sync. Carla's watch would lose 10 minutes during the night, even though it was digital. Ian started waking up with full pages of notes he didn't remember writing, each filled with symbols eerily similar to the ones etched into the glass anchor. And then there were the dreams. Walter found himself dreaming of being underwater, not swimming. but floating, weightless, suspended in time. He'd see the anchor below him, glowing faintly, tethered not by chain, but by strands of light that pulsed like veins. Each time he reached for it, and each time he awoke with a jolt, drenched in sweat, hearing the chime echo in the distance, though his boat was docked and the sea was calm. One morning, Carla burst into the marine station holding a waterproof journal, pages soaked but intact. She'd found it washed ashore not far from the location of the anchor. Inside were handwritten logs, meticulously recorded depth readings, environmental data, and a section labeled Temporal Disruptions. The author, one of the scientists from the MIT vessel. The final entry read, "We activated something. Not all of us returned in the same condition. The anchor is not an anchor, it's a lock." A lock. That word haunted Walter for days. He sat by the dock staring at the horizon, the scent of salt and diesel in his nostrils, wondering what exactly the anchor had been holding in place, or keeping out. When Carla shared the journal with Ian, he became withdrawn. He began pulling late nights at the station, reanalyzing the footage frame by frame, comparing timestamps, measuring pulse distortions. He wasn't sleeping much, and when he did, he'd dream too. They were all dreaming the same thing. A vast ocean, a floating city in ruins, and the anchor, resting like a forgotten relic at the city's center. Ian soon uncovered something else. Anomalies in the local magnetic field that seemed to spike every 12 hours, precisely when the anchor had been disturbed. The pattern matched no known solar activity or man-made interference. It was as if the object were generating its own rhythm, its own sense of time. He brought the data to an old colleague, Dr. Nathaniel Greaves, a theoretical physicist known for fringe research into time perception and dimensional mechanics. Greaves was skeptical until he saw the footage and the journal. Then he asked one question. "Has anyone measured your perception of time since the incident?" Carla blinked. "Why would we? You all interacted with something that appears to operate outside normal time flow. You've experienced shared dreams, memory loss, temporal displacement. That's classic field disruption. For all we know, you're out of sync with reality and dragging the rest of us along." He suggested a series of neurological and biometric tests. The results were inconclusive and deeply unsettling. Walter's circadian rhythm was completely misaligned with solar data. Carla's brain showed patterns typical of people in deep REM sleep while awake. Ian's reaction times were off by milliseconds that shouldn't matter, but did. "We're bleeding time," Greaves muttered. "Not losing it, leaking it, like a fracture." It was around then that Walter made a decision. He had to go back, not just to the location, but to the anchor itself. He had to touch it again, not lift it, not pull it free, just touch it, consciously, intentionally, and try to listen to what it might be telling them. Because by now he was certain, it wasn't just an object, it was a message, or a warning. Ian protested, insisting they weren't ready. Greaves agreed. "If it's a lock," he said, "you might be the key. But do you really want to know what's on the other side of that door?" Walter simply said, "If I don't, someone else will." They outfitted the Elysian with a fail-safe system, a satellite tracker, an audio uplink, and a biometric monitor to track Walter's vitals. Carla would remain topside, monitoring data. Ian would descend just far enough to observe, but not intervene unless absolutely necessary. They set out just after 3 a.m. The stars overhead were unusually clear, the Milky Way a band of cosmic fire across the sky. It felt significant, as if the universe was paying attention. By dawn, they were above the reef. The anchor glowed faintly beneath them, undisturbed, waiting. Walter descended slowly, suited in full dive gear but feeling strangely unburdened. The water embraced him like an old friend. As he approached the coral mound, the hum returned, low, steady, familiar. He hovered just above it, staring. The anchor was more beautiful than he remembered. The etchings now extended further across the surface, like veins of light spreading through its core. He extended a hand, fingers trembling slightly. The moment his skin brushed the surface, barely a contact, his vision exploded with color. He wasn't underwater anymore. He was somewhere else. A vast void stretched around him, filled with drifting echoes of memory, soundless music, waves of emotion that didn't belong to him. He was standing, floating, above a sphere, a world, not Earth. It pulsed with energy, and around it orbited hundreds of glass anchors, suspended in invisible fields, humming in chorus. They weren't anchors, they were stabilizers, locks holding that world in place, within time, within space. One by one, he saw them dim, vanish, fall. The world beneath cracked, then folded inward, collapsing like paper into itself. And then he saw a face, not human, not monstrous, just aware, watching him through layers of time. Its expression was sorrow, or perhaps relief. Then everything snapped back. Walter was floating above the coral mound, his hand still outstretched. The anchor had grown brighter, its etchings now glowing with urgency. His air gauge beeped. He was breathing too fast. He signaled the ascent. Back aboard the Elysian, Carla rushed to him. His pupils were dilated, heart racing, adrenaline spiked. "What did you see?" Walter looked at her, then at Ian, then at the sky. "They're not anchors," he whispered. "They're keys, and we're the door." That night, Carla published a heavily redacted version of the footage on a secure scientific forum. Within hours, it was taken down. The account was flagged. Her computer froze, then rebooted with all files wiped. 3 days later, men in suits visited the Marine station. They showed no badges, asked few questions, made veiled threats. They weren't military, not exactly, but they made it clear. This wasn't a game. The site was now under federal protection, but Walter knew better. He'd seen what was coming, or perhaps what had already happened. And now, we turn it over to you. What do you believe Captain Briggs witnessed in that void? Was it a glimpse into a future collapse, or a past cataclysm repeating itself? Is the anchor holding something in, or are we the ones being held back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your interpretation. And don't forget to like this video if the mystery has you hooked, subscribe for more stories that defy the known, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? In the weeks that followed, Key West changed. It wasn't something you could see on a map or even describe easily. It was in the air, the way seagulls circled but didn't land, the way the tides began arriving early, by seconds at first, then by minutes. Fishermen reported strange readings on their depth finders. Boats drifted slightly off course as though the sea itself had shifted. And the dreams, they didn't stop. Walter, Carla, and Ian found themselves pulled deeper into the mystery, not by choice, but by force. They had tried to step back, tried to let it go, but each time something pulled them back in. A message scratched into sea-weathered wood, a voice on a radio broadcast that echoed what Walter had heard underwater, a satellite image Carla stumbled upon, censored but not fully scrubbed, showing another glowing anchor off the coast of the Aleutian Islands. That was the first real clue. Because if the Key West anchor wasn't the only one, then what were they all connected to? Walter began charting incidents, maritime disturbances, magnetic spikes, sonar anomalies, cross-referencing them with folklore, sailor legends, even shipwreck patterns. It was tedious work, obsessive, but the pattern that emerged was undeniable. There were 7 known locations around the world, all bearing signs of similar activity. From Norway's Lofoten Islands to the South Pacific's Pitcairn Atoll, each point aligned like stars in a constellation. A global grid. Carla called it a temporal net. Ian, more hesitant, described it as a containment lattice. Either way, if one point could fracture time, what would happen if multiple failed? They brought this theory to Dr. Greaves, who by now had gathered his own quiet following in the scientific underground. He was cautious, but intrigued. "You're describing a planetary-scale stabilization mechanism," he said. "A system designed not to control time, but to maintain it." Walter leaned forward. "So someone, or something, designed this system to keep time from breaking." Greaves nodded. "Or to keep something inside time." It was a subtle but terrifying distinction. To test their theory, Ian proposed an expedition to the second confirmed site, an uninhabited stretch of sea near Newfoundland, where an oil rig had once gone dark for 43 seconds without explanation. But before plans could be finalized, they hit a wall. Not a metaphorical one, a literal visit from government officials. Walter came home one evening to find his boat impounded. Carla's equipment was seized. Ian's lab access was revoked. Greaves vanished from the academic forums. But they'd anticipated this. Carla had already uploaded everything, logs, footage, data. onto an encrypted cloud drive, shared anonymously with 5 independent researchers around the world. The truth was no longer contained. Still, the feeling lingered. They had gotten too close. And then something even stranger happened. Walter received a letter. No return address, just his name, handwritten in perfect cursive. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed the Elysian, unmistakably his boat, floating above the reef, but the photograph was dated August 12, 1913. He stared at it for hours. There were other details too, small, impossible ones. The shape of the antennas. The ropes coiled exactly as he remembered leaving them. It wasn't just a similar boat. It was his, in an era when it couldn't have existed. Carla analyzed the ink and paper. Authentic, not a forgery. Someone, or something, is trying to tell you something, she said quietly. Ian said nothing, just stared at the date, because August 12th hadn't happened yet. It was still 2 weeks away. Walter knew what he had to do. He would return to the anchor one last time. On the date in the photo, he didn't know what would happen. If the anchor had pulled his boat through time, even for a moment, it was possible that time itself had begun to fold inward around him. If so, he might be walking into his own past, or his own end, but he couldn't let it go. On the morning of August 12th, the weather was eerily calm. No wind, no waves, just an endless stretch of flat, gleaming sea. Walter boarded the Elysian, which had been mysteriously released days earlier without explanation. All equipment was operational. Nothing had been tampered with. As he untied the ropes and started the engine, Carla and Ian stood by, watching. They didn't try to stop him. Carla pressed something into his hand, a small audio recorder. Just in case. Walter nodded. "If I don't come back, we'll know where to look," Ian said. He gave one last look at the shore, then turned the bow to the southeast and slipped into the open water. The reef came into view an hour later, just as it had before. The anchor shimmered, waiting. Walter dropped anchor and killed the engine. The silence was overwhelming. He descended slowly, breathing steady, eyes locked on the shape below. It hadn't changed. Still flawless, still embedded in its coral cradle. But the hum was louder now. And beneath it, something else, a voice. It wasn't words. It was more like intent, emotion, a warning. He reached out, fingers trembling. The instant he made contact, the world turned inside out. He wasn't underwater anymore. He wasn't anywhere. He was everywhere, across time, across dimensions. He saw fragments of history, cities rising and falling, oceans boiling, stars collapsing. He saw himself, older, younger, living other lives in other times. And he saw the anchors, each one tied to a moment, a choice, a sacrifice. They weren't built by humans. They were left behind, fail-safes, planted across worlds to stabilize collapsing timelines. Their presence kept reality from fracturing. Their removal spelled the end. He understood now. He had triggered a countdown, not just with his touch, but with his awareness. Knowledge was the key, and once he knew, the system began to unravel. He returned to his body in a violent flash, crashing onto the deck of the Elysian as if thrown. He gasped for breath, eyes wide. It was still August 12th, but the sky was different. The sun slightly off, the stars misaligned, the world off by a fraction. He looked at the recorder in his hand, still working. He pressed record. "If you're hearing this, then the clock is already ticking. The anchors are failing. They need to be stabilized, not lifted, not studied, left alone." He paused. "And if they go, time won't end. It will start again, from zero. We now ask you, the viewers, what would you do if you discovered something that controlled the very fabric of time? Would you risk touching it, or would you leave it buried forever? Let us know in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know, and remember, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered. The final recording from Captain Walter Briggs was recovered 3 days later, found sealed in a waterproof case drifting near the dry Tortugas. The Elysian was gone. Not destroyed, not wrecked, just missing. No signs of debris, no oil slick, no distress signal. The case had been tethered to a weather buoy as if Walter had placed it there deliberately. Inside were the recorder, a single photograph of the anchor glowing underwater, and a note, handwritten on oil-smudged paper. "Don't try to fix it. It's not broken. It's protecting you." Carla listened to the recording dozens of times. So did Ian. So did Greaves, who had reappeared after a month off-grid, shaken and quieter than before. None of them could explain how Walter had returned from whatever dimension or rift he'd passed through, even briefly. But they all agreed on one thing: the world hadn't been quite the same since August 12th. News came in from around the globe. Small anomalies at first, timestamps on satellite images that didn't match real-world events, atomic clocks drifting out of sync, then larger ones, entire regions experiencing blackouts in their GPS systems, divers claiming to see ghost images of ships that vanished decades ago. In Antarctica, a research team photographed a perfectly intact galleon frozen into a glacier, its hull bearing markings eerily similar to the anchor's etchings. The world was fracturing, but not breaking. It was more like the surface of a frozen lake starting to crack underfoot, not enough to collapse, but just enough to make everyone realize the ice had never been as solid as they thought. Carla, Ian, and Greaves formed a small task group, informal, secretive. They called themselves the Seventh Line, a nod to the grid pattern Walter had uncovered. Their mission wasn't to reveal the truth to the public, but to prevent further interaction with the anchors, to find the remaining sites and protect them, isolate them, seal them from human interference. Because now they knew the anchors were never meant to be found, not in full, not by people. They were legacy tech, left behind by a civilization, or force, that had once learned the cost of time collapse. This was their way of saving others from repeating the mistake. The problem was, someone else had been listening. Carla intercepted chatter on deep-sea communication channels, private expeditions mobilizing to unknown coordinates. Not scientists, not explorers, but something darker. Resource contractors, artifact hunters, black-budget syndicates that dealt in the unexplainable. They weren't looking to understand the anchors, they were looking to use them. And that's when the true horror set in. Because if Walter was right, if awareness alone could trigger destabilization, then just the act of seeking could unravel the system. The net wasn't just holding time together, it was holding something out. The final realization came quietly. In one of Greaves's models, he simulated a full anchor failure. Not just one, but all 7. The result wasn't a nuclear explosion. It wasn't even extinction. It was erasure. History unspooled like ribbon, peeling back millennia, folding civilizations into static. The simulation ended with a blank screen, a reset. Time would start again, and not necessarily with us. Now only 3 anchors remain untouched. One in the Arctic, one buried in the sands of an ancient desert in Africa, and one location unknown, possibly beneath the Mariana Trench. Carla watches the news every day now, not for politics or weather, but for patterns, disruptions. She can see them, hear them. The chime Walter described, it comes to her in moments of silence, just before sleep. The dreams are stronger than ever. Ian, meanwhile, has moved to northern Iceland, guarding the Lofoten anchor site, working with a small team to install shielding buoys and camouflage systems. They use sonar distortions to mask the location, but every month, a drone flies too close. A sub scans too deep. Someone is still looking. Greaves has gone dark again. No one knows where he is. His last message to Carla was brief. If it's true that time is holding us together, what happens if we no longer remember how to hold it back? She doesn't know the answer. None of them do. But she still listens to Walter's recording every month on the same day, in the same chair, with the same cup of coffee. Because memory, she believes, might be the last thread holding the net in place. So if you're hearing this, if you followed this story all the way through, remember this. The glass anchor off the coast of Key West wasn't a relic. It was a keystone. And when Walter Briggs lifted it, time didn't just pause. It flinched. And you are now part of the memory, part of the awareness, part of what comes next. So tell us, what do you think these anchors really are? Where do you believe the missing one is hidden? And if time were to start over, would we even know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if this mystery pulled you in. Subscribe to the channel for more true and terrifying stories from the edges of reality, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment when the truth begins to surface. And before you go, drop us a line in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Because no matter where you are, one thing is certain: something is out there, and it's waiting.